Oh, you got me with this one. Let's go. This is my bread and butter. Like, you're just allowing me to rant here. Okay, so black people can't establish communities because communities are built on a sense of self and identity. That sense of identity was ripped away when we were ripped away from Africa during the Holocaust of the transatlantic slave trade. You can see this through a few lenses. Many black people don't have their original last names, like pretty much every African American doesn't know where they come from. Our original cultures and way of life totally erased. Eventually, these slaves were effectively mass-produced for the sake of industrial labor. And slavery, I think you know a little bit about that one, totally destroyed any institution of family, of cohesion, of identity. And then, once black people were liberated in the US, started to build institutions like schools, hospitals, a black middle class started to develop. And then, angry white Southerners wanted to retain their way of life, which was dependent on the labor of black people. So they were like, how about we get you guys back, not through slavery, but through jailing. Spoiler alert, they did. Jim Crow laws came into effect and totally eliminated any progress that black people had in the US. Then the era of oppression through Jim Crow and jailing continued for several decades until the civil rights movement developed. And then black people started to develop a sense of community, a sense of pride above all. This sense of pride was dangerous to the white establishment. So after schools integrated and lawful segregation was eliminated, black people were equal. They were thrust into Vietnam against their will to fight for a country that doesn't love them. Shout out to Ali. They returned home to no support with traumatized pasts, PTSD, and the single mother household establishment began. And that's where a lot of these real problems occur. If you're still with me, pay attention, because this is where it gets crazy. So these single female households developed across the US, which destroyed any sense of identity and discipline in black boys across the US. Crime started to go up. Lead was in all the paint and in all the water in the US. That shit makes people violent. Gang culture started to establish because all of these boys without an identity, with a broken home, needed a sense of belonging. And then laws very similar to Jim Crow were established to imprison hundreds of thousands of black men, exacerbating the existing problem and destroying the family identity entirely again. You see in a trend here? And then, yes, trust me, it gets even worse. Crack! So all of these black people are in jail, and now what gets thrown on the street by the CIA is crack, bro. Like the most addictive, destructive drug like ever known to man, besides like heroin or meth. Can you say these things on here? But anyway, crack destroyed the streets. Crack destroyed the black community. It destroyed households. It destroyed people who were recovering from anything, people who were just out of jail. It destroyed everything. If the transatlantic slave trade is considered a Holocaust, crack is also a Holocaust. Mandatory minimum sentences swept up all the people who weren't half dead from the drug addiction, or bankrupted the people who were involved in the drug trade at any capacity. This includes the dealers. This includes people who were associated, just family members, with people who were addicted. Keep in mind, this was only like 30 years ago, and it coincided with the AIDS epidemic, which also killed a lot of black people. And then hip-hop, which was originally developed to directly contrast this whole madness that was the US capitalist system, became very popular and co-opted by labels and individuals who realized that they could spin narratives of black artists and turn black people on each other for a profit. It's still happening to this day. So like the one thing we had that wasn't even tangible, which was music, was also turned against us. There are other things, obviously, that I haven't included. Redlining comes to mind. That's like more specifically why black people can't get the home ownership or like even rent in places that they want to. That's why a community literally can't physically develop, because redlining laws made it so that it was impossible. Also, loans and job opportunities and scholarship opportunities are totally limited. And I said are because they still are this way. So if you weren't keeping up, that's the transatlantic slave trade. And there's the Reconstruction era with lynching and the KKK. And then there's Jim Crow. And then there's Vietnam. And then there's crack. And then there's hip-hop getting fucked. And then there's redlining and other miscellaneous things that just make it fucking impossible to live as a black person, but actually impossible to develop a black community, let alone an entire black identity.